A sitting head coach of the NBA, current and past players, and members of the Mafia were charged in relation to two separate gambling scandals that have rocked the basketball world. Law enforcement announced indictments in what officials described as two separate but major cases, both involving fraud. One of the indictments was characterized as the insider trading saga for the NBA, where current and past players were among those accused of selling non-public information about players and games that was then used to place illegal bets. The other indictment detailed a nationwide scheme to rig illegal poker games. A former player and a now coach were also accused of luring victims to fixed games, where advanced technology, like special glasses that made pre-marked cards visible, a table with X-ray technology, and a poker chip tray that secretly read cards were used to cheat and fleece the victims. FBI Director Kash Patel described the amount of fraud in this case as mind-boggling. He said tens of millions of dollars in fraud, theft, and robbery were uncovered over the course of the investigation. Attorney Marisa Darden joins Forbes True Crime to discuss the major gambling scandals that have been reportedly described as a nightmare for the league. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is attorney Marisa Darden. Marisa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for asking me to be here today.
The FBI announced indictments in what was described as a wide-sweeping criminal enterprise involving NBA players past and present and the Mafia. Over 30 people were arrested in connection to an investigation that spanned over years and was into two separate gambling schemes. FBI Director Kash Patel said the charges include wire fraud, money laundering, extortion, robbery, and illegal gambling. And he said that the fraud is not only mind-boggling, it is in the tens of millions of dollars. And what we're going to be talking about today, is just stuff you see out of the movies. Allegations against organized crime families, allegations against a sitting NBA coach, poker games, underground poker games using an X-ray table to cheat, leaked medical information. You hear this as an attorney. What do you make of it? What was your reaction?
Well, it's exactly like you said, just straight out of a movie. We don't normally hear about the crime families that much anymore. In particular, the La Cosa Nostra, I think, has been fairly underground since the late 80s, and some of the original prosecutions with Giuliani and New York City in the past. So to hear that they're still operating, not just, in business as we might normally hear about it, but really with these sophisticated business modes to defraud folks out of, gambling money or illegal poker games, things like that. That was a real shock. And then I think the more serious part that really struck me, particularly given the time, the fact that it's the beginning of the NBA season, the top of the hour this year, and that there's been a lot of commingling of legal gambling and sports betting and sports. To hear that there are some players who were giving out, non-public material, non-public information, and also using that to their advantage with their other co-conspirators, I think that really is a shocking allegation, both from as a fan and from.
I know it was shocking hearing this, and there's two major but separate indictments, and one was
Right.
categorized as the NBA insider information one, and I want to talk about that one first.
Sure.
Joseph Nozella, he is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. He called this one of the most brazen sports corruption schemes since online betting became widely legalized in the United States. And this indictment says essentially that confidential information about players, about teams, about their medical information at times was used to place illegal bets, and the defendants were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. How serious is this indictment?
The charges in the first indictment that you mentioned about the using information to cast bets through, by the way, legal means, right? Using online sports betting or sports books that are otherwise completely legal, but using non-public material information to, information that would have otherwise not been available to the public or to those sports gambling entities is very serious. The top charge of the conspiracy and wire fraud is has a maximum penalty of 20 years in jail plus a fine or both. And so the six individuals who are charged in that first indictment are really looking at some very serious stakes and penalties. It also is driven in the United States sentencing guidelines. Federal court is very different from state court. In federal court, the way that your punishment is ultimately calculated by a judge involves using a series of numbers and figures and examples in the United States sentencing guidelines to try to calculate an appropriate sentence. A judge will ultimately get to decide what those sentences are, but the guidelines are meant to be advisory, and they're triggered largely by the loss amounts that are calculated in these cases. So the more money that folks won or sort of defrauded the betting systems and organizations and profited from, the more time they're going to be looking at, up to 20 years in jail.
I want to talk about some of the allegations in this first indictment. Some of the defendants are former and there is a current NBA player, and get your reaction. Former NBA player Damon Jones, who worked as an unofficial assistant coach for the Lakers during the 2022-2023 season, allegedly leaked non-public medical information about a player to someone who then bet against the Lakers. Terry Rozier, who was a player, he was accused of telling someone he was going to leave a game early over a supposed injury. He did leave a game early, and then that information was sold. An unnamed co-conspirator, whose description matched Chauncey Billups, a former player and the sitting head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, allegedly told the defendant in the indictment that Portland would throw a game in order to get a better draft pick and that certain players would be benched from a game. I'm curious, as a defendant here, how exactly do you defend yourself from these charges? I mean, how airtight is this case?
Well, you have to remember, again, there's always a presumption of innocence. So the charges are just that. They're allegations of wrongdoing, and each defendant has the benefit in our legal system of being presumed innocent until proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I guess there's a question of, how this investigation will continue to unfold, how these indictments are supported by facts. But the Eastern District of New York is a sophisticated, very long-standing, well-respected U.S. Attorney's Office. And in any circumstance like this, when you're talking about allegations of wrongdoing at the highest level of our sports industry and in our commerce, they would not have brought these charges unless they felt that they could prove them at trial beyond a reasonable doubt. So to answer your specific question, there's always the presumption of innocence. You want, as a criminal defense attorney, you always want to make sure that you can leave no stone unturned and try to defend these charges zealously. But generally speaking, when the Eastern District of New York brings an indictment, they've got the goods, they've got the evidence, and they feel very confident that they can prove these charges.
I want to move on to the second indictment. The second indictment involves the mafia, and I want to get your reaction to that. It details an alleged nationwide scheme to fix illegal underground poker games that involves organized crime families as well as the NBA. So, according to the indictment, wireless cheating technology like contact lenses and X-ray tables, rigged poker games, and former players were used as what were called face cards to lure victims into these fixed games. And everyone in here allegedly was in on it. We're talking these face card former players, other players at the table, the dealers. Everyone was in on it except these victims. So they come to the game. The game's fixed using technology like manipulated card shufflers, those X-ray tables, contact lenses, special cameras. And these victims lost a lot of money. What do you make of this indictment?
It's wild in a nutshell. I mean, we really haven't seen anything like this in a very long time. And I think we talked about this at the top. I guess it's not that you don't assume that the Cosa Nostra might still be doing something, but you really don't hear about explosive indictments like this where they're able to sort of prove charges or bring charges that are with this level of specificity. So it suggests, number one, that there was a coordinated effort here. Number two, it's shocking that these crime families were working together to do this over a series of time in different locations over a series of years. In what sounds like the way they're describing some of these places as residences or private residences, not necessarily like bars or public spaces. And so the level of coordination is really impressive. The other thing that's interesting, I think, the media has been making a lot of hay about, the sort of the facts about this, which definitely sound like they're out of a movie, right? But the charges are quite similar to the first indictment, which is namely, that there's a scheme to defraud and that there are money laundering charges associated with that, which is also a very stiff penalty. Those are 10 years maximum, in addition to the wire fraud of 20 years maximum. There's also some charges in the indictment of John Doe's using threats, coercive intimidation in order to relinquish these monies or get these funds from the folks who were defrauded. I think that sort of ratchets up the drama, but also tells you about the level of depth that they've gone to investigate this case and the victims who are likely cooperating to talk about what they were defrauded from or how much money they lost.
And NYPD Police Commissioner Tish, she essentially said it's extraordinary that 4 out of the 5 crime families are on one indictment. And what was alleged there that the members and associates of these crime families took cuts and profits and they organized all of these games. I mean, I didn't realize until yesterday when I was watching the FBI conference, I didn't realize that organized poker games were still a crime. Or still a crime that was happening at least. I mean, how serious is that crime? Because millions of dollars were on the table and it seems like people were defrauded, according to the FBI, out of millions.
Yeah. I think the number that I saw was like, $100,000 here, $60,000 here, $150,000 per person. That adds up quickly. And so again, especially when you add the violence aspect to this, and the intimidation and the threats, I think it's pretty serious. What else? I saw the same interview that you did with the commissioner of the NYPD, and I think it's worth noting here that there is a joint task force between the federal authorities and NYPD, which also is a remarkable opportunity to highlight the coordination between these folks. I think in these times, you're always worried about whether there are things that are going to fall through the cracks. And as a government, person, as somebody who used to be a former prosecutor, I was really heartened to see that NYPD and federal authorities are still cooperating and working together to try to combat crime in a city like New York, where, we've all seen rounders, right? I mean, we've all sort of remember back in the day of thinking about underground poker rings as kind of like a sexy thing. But to know that, like you said, it's still very, it has a cost, that there are true victims here, and that it may be one thing if it's an illegal poker game and the odds are straight and everything is sort of running above board. But when you add this added layer of intentionality of, folks like Mr. Billups allegedly bringing their friends to be defrauded, or to bring other folks who would be interested in playing with celebrities to then be defrauded by these folks. It suggests a level of sort of sinister planning that takes it to a much different realm.
And when you look at these two indictments, they're separate. There are some defendants that are in both. But as you said, a lot of the charges boil down to the same thing. So, in your mind, or in the mind of the law, rather, what's the more serious indictment? The NBA insider trading or the rigged poker games one?
I think they're both serious in terms of the maximum potential penalties that the defendants who've been charged are facing. I think the NBA illegal betting case has more legs in the sense that it may not be over. There are only 6 people indicted in that case. There were a bunch of unnamed co-conspirators. The NBA has previously investigated Mr. Rozier and others for illegal online gambling and illegal betting. And so there's a question in my mind about whether additional indictments might be coming, whether the NBA may continue to internally investigate or may hire outside counsel to do a review of their investigative tactics and techniques to make sure that they're rooting out, this insider information leaking out in order for individuals to take advantage of it. So, it's all bad. It's all potentially, scary, I think, particularly for the individuals and their families. Those have real consequences. But in terms of, sort of where this is all going to go, I think the illegal betting in the NBA case has more tentacles.
And I think that this raises a lot of questions about what's the future of sports betting in this country, because this was described as, like I said earlier, one of the most brazen gambling schemes, illegal gambling
Right.
schemes, since it became widely legal in the United States. A lot of questions raised about the NBA as well. I'm curious, do you think that knowing that paired with Kash Patel, he said he wants to keep our entertainment industry fair and secure. Do you think that the book will be thrown at these defendants to prove a point?
It's hard to say. I mean, anytime you have a famous headlined person in an indictment, I think there are questions about whether the investigations are sound or whether they're trying to make an example out of someone who's a public figure. And some of the comments from the defense attorneys who represent some of the NBA players or the former NBA players in the news media, want to paint that picture. But again, indictments are just allegations of wrongdoing, but they come with a very high threshold of facts. And so the government wouldn't bring this case if they didn't think that they could make it. You wonder whether there may be a reckoning coming. I mean, sports betting has exploded since it was basically made legal in 2018 by Congress after repealing several acts in the past that had prevented online gambling and illegal, gambling at a high level. The scandals of yore, the Pete Rose and the, baseball scandals that we all remember. This feels new and different because again, they were using legal channels, legal betting operations and businesses, legitimate businesses, to do this and carry out their schemes. I think there's going to be a big question looming about how much crackdown are we able to really enforce? Is there an opportunity to ask more questions about regulation? And, as a society, how cozy do we want sports gambling and our major professional sports to be? As a consumer, again, as a fan, if you go to most NBA, games or even NFL stadiums, there are sports gambling facilities on site in many places. And so, FanDuel is everywhere and advertisements are everywhere during games. Do we want that as a society? I mean, it's an opportunity to sort of question, like, is this really the right thing that we want to be doing? I think those are the hard questions that both regulators and commissioners of our big sports teams and our big sports athletic associations are going to have to answer.
These indictments got international attention. It made headlines around the world just because I think the nature of them and how much it really sounds like a movie. You have mafia involvement, allegedly. You have allegations against an NBA coach, former and a current player. I mean, these are serious allegations here. I'm curious, I know you said that the NBA insider information one, you think that indictment has more legs, has more tentacles. Is this investigation wrapped up? Are we going to see further charges down the line? What does that really look like?
It's hard to know. I mean, typically when a prosecutor brings an indictment like this and they have unnamed co-conspirators in the indictment, it means like one of two things might be happening. One, either those unindicted co-conspirators are cooperating with their investigation and are, as it says in the indictment, are known to the grand jury, which suggests either that their names were mentioned or that they, in fact, may have been a witness or testified in front of the grand jury as part of the prosecution's presentment of the information. So question whether so query whether those are going to be individuals who might testify as witnesses at trial, for example, or information might come out that they are otherwise cooperating with the government. If they're not cooperating, are they going to be indicted? What other individuals may come forward and provide proactive information to the government that might have information about this that weren't originally approached by law enforcement is a question. And then again, I mentioned, not just the NBA, but I think all of the sporting agencies and associations, including college athletics and other sports teams, are going to have to go back and really think about what are their internal processes. What is their investigation technique and mechanism? How can they proactively root this out? Are they, sort of crossing their T's and dotting their I's about what they're looking for to make sure it doesn't get to this level, in any other situation or circumstance? Particularly, again, Mr. Rozier, I think, was investigated and cleared from an investigation within the NBA of the 2023 game that's mentioned in the indictment. What went wrong? What did they miss? What information did they not have access to that they could have had access to that might have prevented this from getting all the way to the feds? So those are the kinds of questions I'm looking at.
Well, there's certainly a lot of questions that we're looking at too. And as we see developments in this case, I hope you can come on back and break them down with me. Marisa Darden, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.